Hey, it's Kaero. Welcome back to the channel. It is October 27th, 2022, and today we're going over the most recent spoilers from the Magic Weekly stream for the Brothers War releasing soon next month. I hope you enjoy. Let's cut straight to the chase. If you like the video, please hit the thumbs up. Consider subscribing for more MTG Arena and spoiler content. Let's go. So let's start with a banger right out of the gate. Gixx, Yawgmoth Praetor. Gixx is back. 2 black, 1 generic for a legendary creature is a Phyrexian Praetor. It has power and toughness of 3/3, and whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life. If they do, they draw a card. So let's break this down before we get into the other text part of the text box. So in 1v1 formats, this is always going to be you. So every time a creature you control deals damage to your opponent, you can pay 1 life, draw a card for each time that happens. So if you have 2 creatures dealing damage, you can pay 2 life, 2 different triggers, draw 2 cards. That is actually pretty massive in an aggressive or mid-range deck where you're out front of your opponent, and it just gives you a lot of benefit basically to having 1 or more creatures on the field. It also makes them kind of want to block your creatures, right? So it will make them sort of unfavorably block things when otherwise they would just let that damage go through, especially if you have a 1/1 or a 2/1 creature that they're like, well, we'll let that damage go through. They might not want to do that this time, considering you can draw cards. The next ability on here is 3 black, 4 generic, discard X cards. Exile the top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from among their cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. So on the surface, this ability looks pretty good. It is conditional, though, in that you must have 2 things really need to happen here. You must have about 3 or 4, I would say, cards in your hand to be able to discard and want to discard them. To exile the top 3 or 4 cards of your target opponent's library, you wouldn't want to do this when you have 1 card left in your hand, right? That doesn't make much sense. But you can play lands and cast spells from among them, so if your opponent tutors something to the top of their library that you know is very good, or to prevent them from drawing that thing and playing it against you, you can discard some land cards and grab that. So it is a situational thing. We know that another mechanic is coming back, that is Unearth. So there's some Unearth synergy here. There's also some Flashback and Disturb that are in standard right now. So discarding those cards and getting the value by playing them back from your graveyard would actually be a good thing to build around here. But if we don't get hung up on the second ability, the one that costs 7 on this card, just having the top static ability is actually really, really good. So I think Gixx is going to see play, especially since Mono Black is so strong right now, particularly Mono Black aggro. This is a perfect fit for a 3-drop. Next up, we have Hurkyl, Master Wizard. 2 blue, 1 generic for a human wizard advisor legendary creature. Power and toughness of 2/4, and this is a large text box. At the beginning of your end step, if you've cast a non-creature spell this turn, reveal the top 5 cards of your library. For each card type among non-creature spells that you've cast this turn, you may put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this card immediately strikes me as more of a tempo card, where you're trying to out-tempo your opponent and you're trying to be a little bit more aggressive than a typical control deck. This doesn't strike me as a draw-go control build because you have to proactively do things on your turn. If you've noticed, it says at the beginning of your end step, not at the beginning of each end step. So if you're using a counter spell on your opponent's turn, you're not going to be able to trigger this effect. You're going to have to play your instants that you have and decide whether or not you want to play them on your turn to trigger this effect, or wait until the opportunity arises for you to set them off in tempo on their turn without getting this effect. That being said, there are good instants and sorceries that you can play on your own turn. This also just doesn't count for instants and sorceries, but artifacts and enchantments as well. I think this is purely a constructed card. I don't see this being very good in limited because you typically are not going to have all the different card types in the ratios that you would want to make this pay off every single time. But having this out on turn 3, playing a Memory Deluge or something to draw cards, and then drawing those cards, and then getting one of the instants or sorceries back into your hand, this could be a card draw machine. So I think if this sees play in standard, it's going to be heavily a build-around card, and we'll see. I think the verdict is out on this one still, so I'm not sure if this is going to see play or not, but it has the potential to be powerful. One of the things I want to get to sooner rather than later is the returning mechanic of Unearth. So here's the card that they revealed. It's Ashnod's Harvester. Costs 2 generic mana for a construct. It's a 3/1. And whenever it attacks, you can exile target card from a graveyard. Not bad. Situational graveyard hate, and then having the ability to unearth it for 1 black, 1 generic, meaning that you return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, and then you exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So having Unearth is just like having Disturb that we've seen in Standard recently and Flashback, but it's just bringing back a creature and having it have haste and then exile it. So it's good in aggressive decks. If you have to discard this to, say, Liliana of the Veil or something like that, you can still gain value off of it. So we may see more Reanimator decks happening in Standard, and the graveyard is going to continue to be a place where people play things from, and it's going to be continue to be something that you're going to need some interaction with. Next up, we have Erza, Powerstone Prodigy. 1 blue, 2 generic for a human artificer. Legendary creature. This card depicts Erza in his younger years. It's a 1/3 vigilance, and it has the ability to tap 1 generic mana and tap it to draw a card, then discard a card. And whenever you discard 1 or more artifact cards, create a tapped Power Stone token. This ability triggers only once each turn. The token is an artifact with tap, add, colorless mana, and that mana can't be spent to cast a non-artifact spell. So this is obviously a constructed build around, or if there's a limited deck out there that focuses solely on using artifacts with artifact synergies, this is going to be a very high priority pick in that environment. This card is basically dependent on you being able to discard artifacts to take full advantage of it. Now, it does have Vigilance, which is kind of nice, so you can get in with it if you really need to, and then still be able to tap it and draw a card and discard a card. With the addition of Unearth in the Brothers' War, especially if you have Unearth on artifacts, this is going to be quite powerful by using your graveyard as a place to replay things from. So this is a build-around card. This is Control. Control likes this. And this will probably see play, in Limited for sure. I'm not sure if it will see much play in Standard Constructed. We'll have to see the power level of all the artifacts that follow. Speaking of Erza and multiple Erzas in the same set, we have Erza, Prince of Krug, who seems to be older than the other version of Erza, but younger than the final version, which we'll see here in a little bit. It's 1 blue, 1 white, 2 generic as a 4-drop, 2/3 legendary creature, human artificer. It acts as a pretty good lord for artifact creatures, giving them all +2/+2, and also has this ability to tap 6 mana of any color and create a token that's a copy of target artifact you control, except it's a 1/1 soldier creature in addition to its other types. So I think this is going to have multiple uses here. This is a very expensive ability, but nowhere does it say that you create a token that's a copy of target artifact creature. So having the ability to make target artifacts into creatures is going to be really weird, and I'm interested to see that there's going to be some really cool stuff that people do with this. That being said, I think you either A, go wide with a bunch of little artifacts and then use this Lord ability, or B, if there's a massively powerful thing that has a massively powerful enter the battlefield or static ability on one of the artifacts, then you can make a 1/1, who cares about the power and toughness thing with Erza, Prince of Krug. I think the verdict is still out on this. I think, as with the other Erza, it kind of depends on your artifact synergies that you have in the deck. Let me know what you think in the comments. This one's hard to rate, but I wouldn't be surprised to see play. So, next up, we have Titania, Voice of Gaia. This card is pretty much a novel, so bear with me as I go through it. 2 green, 1 generic for an elemental, legendary creature, 3/4, so not bad. 3/4 reach for 3, fine. When 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you gain 2 life. So if 1 or more lands are put in, you gain 2 life. You don't gain 2 life for every land, just when that happens. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 4 more land cards in your graveyard and you both own and control Titania, Voice of Gaia, and a land named Argoth, the land right next to it, Sanctum of Nature, exile them, then meld them into Titania, Gaia Incarnate. So meld is coming back in the Brothers' War, and both of these cards will meld into a card that I'm about to show you in just a second. So let's look at the land too. Argoth, Sanctum of Nature. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary green creature. So most of the time it's going to come in tapped. Not bad though, you can play it on turn 1 if you don't have anything to play. It taps to add 1 green mana, and it also taps, and if you pay a cost of 4, including 2 green, 2 generic, you can create a 2/2 green bear creature token, then mill 3 cards, and activate only as a sorcery. As you can tell, whenever you tap that 4 mana and mill cards, 1 or more lands might hit your graveyard, you might gain some life, and then trigger the meld. So these cards by themselves, the front faces here, seem decent, right? The land seems pretty good. I think that's a one of in every green deck that you run that's not completely mono green aggro. To me, this seems sort of like something that goes in Golgari or Sultai, because we do have a lot of cards in Standard that work on that self-mill mechanic, which hasn't really been relevant or powerful enough to see play in competitive Standard, but it could see play if this proves to be a good card. Now, let's look at the melded version. The melded version is actually pretty insane. Titania, Gaia Incarnate, Star. So we see this throwback to things like Multani, Star green creatures. And this has power and toughness that are each equal to the number of lands you control. It also has Vigilance, Reach, Trample, and Haste. And when Titania enters the battlefield, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So all of those lands that you milled, lands that you sacrificed, like Field of Ruin, maybe you got rid of one of their good lands, and triggered the meld ability for this, you get all those lands back. Also has an ability of 1 green, 3 generic, put 4+1/+1 counters on target land you control. It becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste, and it's still a land. It's important to note that that ability permanently makes it a creature with haste. That's still a land that can still be tapped for mana, although I'm not sure that you would need it at that point because you'd have so many lands in play. Yeah, this is a game winner. If you manage to meld this thing and it's not dealt with, it does die to basically any black-based or white exile removal. You're not going to burn this away in red, but it does die, and when a melded card dies, both of the cards go to the graveyard. So if this melds and your opponent destroys it, your land and the original Titania will go to your graveyard. So it doesn't have any protection there, but it does have Trample and Haste being the most important things. So at the beginning of your upkeep, this enters the battlefield, you get to swing in for, whatever, 12 or 13 Trample. If they don't have any instant speed removal, they can't take care of it, this thing will win you games. And then if you get to untap with it, there's no limit on how many times that you can pay that 4 mana to make one of your lands a 4/4 creature, 0/0 with 4+1/+1 counters on it. So this card's very good. I think the land will see play. I think Titania will see play. I am not super confident that it's going to see play in green-based aggressive decks because they need to be faster than this. But things like Sultai, Control, Midrange, Golgari, I think could run this pretty happily. Oh boy, we have another Teferi Planeswalker in blue. Teferi Temporal Pilgrim, 2 blue, 3 generic for Legendary Planeswalker Teferi. He's going back in time to figure out how to operate the Sylex. Whenever you draw a card, put a loyalty counter on Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. He comes in with 4 loyalty. For 0, draws you a card. That ticks him up +1, so that means if you bring him in and do a 0, he gets to be 5. -2, create a 2/2 blue spirit creature token with vigilance, and whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And -12, target opponent chooses a permanent they control and returns it to its owner's hand. Then they shuffle each non-land permanent they control into its owner's library. So he Cyclonic Rifts you, basically. So this Planeswalker, as Teferi usually is, seems pretty powerful. So for 5, he can -2, he can defend himself. The next turn you draw a card, he goes back up to 3. Then you can do 0, draw another card, he goes right back up to 4. He can either make a bunch of spirits. By the way, if you untap with him after making a spirit, do his +0 and draw your card for turn, you all of a sudden have a 4/4 blue spirit creature token with vigilance, and he's right back to 4 mana. So I think generally what you do with him is if you're not under pressure, you can keep drawing cards, win the game that way, or if you are under pressure, have him come down, create a spirit, draw a card next turn. That spirit's a 4/4. Rinse and repeat that cycle until you have an army of spirits, and then just smash your opponent. Teferi is powerful. This card is very, very good. It's very good in Azorius control. It's going to be good in almost every deck that plays it that doesn't want to win very quickly. I would see Teferi being a staple of the format. Let me know what you think. So I want to wrap this video up by saying that basically these are my first impressions of these cards. These cards were released about an hour previous to me recording this video. Chances are that I did get something wrong or I missed something, but hopefully this has been a pretty good primer for you for upcoming cards in the new Brothers War set. And I look forward to playing with all of these cards and recording some MTG Arena content. I appreciate you hitting the thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you want to support the channel, and I'll see you next time.